Let's imagine we want to be the new football manager or soccer manager for the football club known as the Cism Football Club, which, like any business or organisation, is run by the board or senior leadership. And this board or senior leadership is responsible for setting what is known as the ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, which is an enterprise framework which sets the boundaries known as risk appetite and risk tolerance. And in a football-soccer analogy, the risk appetite is your broad high-level strategic desire for taking chances to win, whereas risk tolerance is a tactical limit of how much negative deviation or damage you can actually handle when things go wrong. And in the world of football, aka soccer, things can go wrong and there is no guaranteed strategy to success, so you need to set operational boundaries of how much risk you are willing to take to become a successful football club. And here's a key technical Cism keynote. This whole process of the board or senior leadership establishing the organisation's risk appetite, the tolerance, the security strategy and the accountability is known as governance. To expand into the technicalities of governance, this essentially asks the question of what outcomes do we expect from information security? Well, to be technically accurate here, the Cism exam is very explicit in that there is enterprise risk, aka the enterprise risk management, which is the ERM, and inside the ERM, the enterprise risk, there is information security risk, which is a subset of the enterprise risk. And in fact, all risks, including legal, financial, operations, etc., are all subsets of the enterprise risk. So hopefully now you can see why setting the governance is very important, especially with another key term that I'm going to explain known as accountability. And in order to explain accountability, let's go back to the question of what outcomes do we expect from information security. That is the high-level governance question. Now, as mentioned earlier in the video, that question might be answered or set by the board, the senior leadership, and that might be success, which means winning a trophy for the Cism Football Club, or it might be passing your Cism exam. Either way, the key to remember is that governance sets the direction and accountability. Important keynote, this means that the board of directors or senior leadership are ultimately accountable for governance. That means that the buck stops here at the board. They are ultimately accountable. That means they cannot, I repeat, not delegate away their accountability because the board sets the governance level and therefore is ultimately accountable. Now, to achieve the strategy, which is the success of a trophy, the board therefore may inject lots of money, which sets the direction under the governance. So to repeat, governance sets the direction, however this is as far as the board accountability goes. Here's an important Cism exam tip, which consistently distinguishes between governance and management, because after governance there is management. And management is the actual execution of the governance, which is not necessarily the board or senior leadership, but rather a manager, a football or soccer manager, or a Cism cybersecurity manager. So to clarify, governance sets the direction, whereas management executes the governance. So the board might appoint a manager to manage and execute that governance. And again, to make it crystal clear, because this is an important Cism exam takeaway, the board or senior leadership sets the governance, which sets the direction, which might be to win the trophy, which makes them ultimately accountable. That's the board is ultimately accountable, and that's governance, which sets the direction, to which management, aka the manager, executes that governance, which in this football soccer analogy is to win the information security trophy for the Cism Football Club, which then makes the board and senior leadership very happy, as well as the Cism Football Club fans. And this usually results in more money, more money, more money, and the cycle hopefully then repeats in a positive manner. And hey, if it doesn't, we've always got the Enterprise Risk Management ERM framework. Now we understand the basics and the key distinction between governance and management, let's focus in on management. And again, management is the execution of the governance set by the board and senior leadership. And management could be a manager, aka the Cism manager, which is what we want to become, because Certified Information Security Manager just sounds cool, doesn't it? Now, as a Certified Information Security Manager, there is a lot to do, and a lot that the manager is responsible for. So in order to explain all of this, let's go into some further terminologies we need to know for our Cism exam. Let's start by saying the Security Manager's job is to take the direction established through governance and translate this into programs, processes, controls, and resources that actually deliver expected outcomes. To do this, the manager monitors performance, reports to leadership, and brings problems back up the governance chain when a decision above their management authority is needed. This separation matters for two reasons. First, it protects organisational integrity. When the security function, aka the manager, is both setting policy and exclusively enforcing it, without any oversight from the board or senior leadership, there is no check to see whether resources are being well spent or whether the right risks are being managed. Secondly, the Cism exam rewards this key distinction because whenever a question asks what a security manager should do first, or what action is most appropriate, the answer is almost never involving jumping to a technical fix. Instead, it involves the security manager or football manager to understand the direction aligning to business strategy and escalating or reporting up the chain when a governance decision is required. So to summarise this important Cism keynote, the manager should always report up the governance chain around performance and management and any problems, and it's up to the governance, aka the senior leadership or board, to then adjust or act accordingly, which may be an adjustment in the business strategy, which then goes back to the management, who can then execute the governance. Now, an effective security governance produces measurable outcomes that demonstrate value to stakeholders. Now, ISACA, which is the governing body for your Cism exam, describes 5 outcomes a mature security governance program delivers. And to help you remember this for your Cism exam, here's a cool Cism bonus exam tip. Remember 5, as in 5 on the manager's trackie, is the number assigned to the manager because there are 5 outcomes of successful InfoSec governance as described by ISACA for your Cism exam. The first outcome is strategic alignment, the second outcome is value delivery, the third outcome is risk management, the fourth outcome is resource optimization, and the fifth outcome is performance measurement. We will dive into all of these in a moment, but here's a Cism exam tip. These 5 outcomes will appear directly and indirectly throughout the exam, so it's very important that we know these at a conceptual level. So let's get into the first outcome, which is strategic alignment, which essentially means that security objectives are derived from business objectives. So in this football soccer analogy, security objectives could be football objectives, aka how the team play, and the business objective is to win the trophy. However, important technical keynote, managers should understand business strategy, participate in planning processes, and design programs that enable rather than constrain business growth. So in this football soccer analogy, the manager might want to play sexy football rather than defensive football in order not to constrain business growth, whilst also winning the trophy, which is the business objective, by making beautiful sexy football, which is the security objective. Moving on to the second outcome, which is value delivery. And value delivery is all about ensuring security investments produce expected benefits, such as the manager getting the best out of his players and in turn the team to achieve the business objective, which of course is to win a trophy. Now there is a little bit more to this second outcome, being value delivery, because you see the security program not just delivers on its commitments cost effectively, but the value is measured by what the program enables. This might be business continuity, customer trust, regular standing, but more specifically in this football soccer analogy, this extra value add might be in improved player morale, performances and teamwork, which makes this manager hire very cost effective in the long term. Now the third outcome is risk management, which is probably the manager's worst nightmare. For example, managing the risk of a star player getting injured for the rest of the season. And here is a key takeaway for the outcome 3. Once a risk is identified, assessed, it then needs to be treated within the organisation's risk appetite. Important technical keynote. Risk management is a continuous governance function, not a one-time audit event. In fact, throughout a full football soccer season, it's likely many players will get injured, so the manager needs to be on top of his risk management game. Now this leads us nicely to the fourth outcome, which is resource optimization, which is where people, technology and budget are deployed where they produce the most risk reduction value relative to cost. This requires prioritization, which is a governance level judgment. After all, the manager cannot afford any more injuries and needs to manage the risk accordingly and ensure that the right people are in the right places, aka the tactics, to work around this injury. And the fifth and final outcome is performance measurement, which tracks the security program, aka football, effectiveness through meaningful metrics and key performance indicators. These measurements demonstrate security value to executives, identify improvement opportunities, and ensure controls operate as intended to reduce actual risk, which in this analogy could be adding strength training into the players' training to avoid them getting injuries to key ligaments and muscles. Now, after training has finished, the manager is back in his office doing some due diligence. That is analysing previous matches and training and seeing where there is opportunities for the club to grow and maybe buy some new players for the Cism Football Club, to which the manager has identified a potential gem in the opposition team from a recent match from the analysis video. So the manager starts his investigation to understand the risks before taking any action, aka buying the player or even inquiring if the player is available for transfer to the Cism Football Club, as well as whether the player is a good character, is the right age and can take the club forward, because all this due diligence will make it easier for the manager to explain to the board and senior leadership whether they should buy this player or not. In other words, the manager is doing his homework, and once the homework is complete, the manager has exercised due diligence. And the next stage for the manager is to take action to purchase the player, which requires escalation to a decision maker with authority to approve this decision. And this process is known as due care, so the manager has invoked due care. And the manager explains to the decision makers, aka the board or senior leadership, that he has performed due diligence and that this player, let's call him Pasolini, would be a great addition to the team and would fill a gap in midfield, or you could say remediate a gap in midfield which lacks a little bit of creativity. And therefore the board or senior leadership should accept this transfer request because it will remediate that gap in midfield. And if it is not approved, then there is a risk that the Cism Football Club will not win the trophy at the end of the season. Important Cism technical keynote: failing due care after due diligence is a governance failure that exposes the organisation to legal and regulatory liability. So let's say in this analogy that the board approves the funds and Pasolini is now a Cism Football Club player. And this brings a lot of excitement to the Cism Football Club, including with the board and senior leadership, of what is now possible. And this brings us on to the next section that I want to explain for your Cism exam, which is about enterprise governance, culture, structure, roles and responsibilities, all of which made it possible for Pasolini to sign for the Cism Football Club, and is what excited Pasolini in terms of the security project and initiative that has been planned as the strategy for the Cism Football Club, and the execution that has been enacted perfectly by the current manager who fought to sign Pasolini. Now this leads us nicely to the organisational culture and risk culture. And per the Cism exam, culture is the collection of shared values, assumptions and behaviours that characterise how people in an organisation make decisions when no one is watching. So for Pasolini, the football club might feel like, why does it feel like somebody's watching me, as the Rockwell song goes. But on a serious note, and a Cism exam keynote, culture is how security managers implement durable controls, such as signing Pasolini into the midfield controller role. Also, a policy is only as strong as the culture that follows it. Now it's worth knowing for technical completeness that the board and senior leadership, aka governance, owns and approves high-level policies that state the club's, aka organisation's intent, direction and risk appetite, whereas the security manager, aka management, owns and defines tactical standards, which we'll explain a bit later, but that is more technical, whereas the board and senior leadership are more high-level, which just defines the direction and accountability, whereas the manager defines the tactics and the fieldwork for Pasolini to play with. So essentially, tone at the top matters directly here, because when the board and the CEO visibly champion information security, middle management follows, which means players such as Pasolini follow, because they know senior leadership does not think policy is just a tick box, it's actually a real deal. And this positive attitude of championing a policy travels downwards faster than any policy actually could. And a good way to remember this section of the video is that championing a policy means champiano, champiano, ole, ole, ole. Now, with the board's backing and policy, the manager is back in his office doing his strategy planning. And before we go into strategy, let's imagine the manager has some mottos at the club, which is governance without strategy is paperwork. And the other motto is strategy without governance is ambition without accountability. And yes, the Cism textbook actually says this. Now, the job of a security manager in Domain-1 of the Cism is to build a security strategy, the same way a football manager would build a football strategy. Now, a security strategy is derived from business strategy and expressed through a governance structure that can execute and monitor that strategy. And having the board and senior leadership, aka the governance explained earlier in this video, in place massively helps the manager develop a strategy and plan that executes that business strategy under the current governance framework that is set out by the club. Now, here's a very important technical keynote which I found very useful in my own studies, because the literature on the internet is very poor in explaining this. So when we are talking about strategic objectives, we are talking about a plan supporting business strategy, and strategy means strategic. That means supporting our mission, the vision, and our values. Because when we talk about our mission, which was made from our vision, which was made from our values, we are talking about strategic objectives as part of our strategic plan, which is the same thing. So our strategic plan is the long-term overarching plan of where we want to be in 3 to 5 years, and this is set by the board or senior leadership. And again, to make this crystal clear, the strategic plan is decided upon by governance, that is senior leadership, board of directors, or someone at that level. But it is not you, aka not the InfoSec manager or the football manager, who might advise the board, but other than that, the board is responsible for the strategic plan. Now, where the manager, aka you, do come in is when a tactical plan is needed, and the strategic plan does feed the tactical plan, and the tactical plan is usually an annual plan, aka a 1-year plan, which is effectively management, aka you. So the tactical plan will be things like projects, acquisitions, hiring, etc. All the things we do in a year that will move us in the right strategic direction, aka to our motto, be the best, win the trophy. So again, the tactical plan is the management plan, which is 1 year. And now, a very important Cism exam bonus tip. These two plans, being the strategic plan and the tactical plan, equal due diligence. So the club, having both a strategic and a tactical plan, have exercised due diligence. But what about due care? Well, there is one last plan, so there's actually 3 plans, not 2, and the last one is operational, which is quite self-explanatory, which is acting upon the first 2 plans. And the operational plan can be daily, weekly, monthly, and is essentially the manager doing his day-to-day training, that is with the players on the training pitch, as well as the actual match days where the players perform in front of a live crowd to try to get the results to push the club forward and closer to that trophy, which is the ultimate strategic plan, aka the governance. And to summarise these planning levels hierarchy, there is the strategic plan, which is 3 to 5 years, there is the tactical plan, which is 1 year, and these two form the due diligence, and then there is the operational day-to-day, which is the due care, and operational may be described as 1 to 3 months, aka short term. And these 3 plans combined are known as the planning stage. And because it starts with strategic planning, you could say this is strategic planning, but nonetheless it's planning, and this is important because planning is not the same as strategy. In fact, these terms are not interchangeable and are often confused and misunderstood across various literature and textbooks. So I will make this crystal clear in this video for you. Planning is a formal structured process of mapping out milestones, resources and timelines to execute a strategy. In other words, planning is the technical detail of how to achieve the strategy. And that covers the planning levels of strategic, tactical and operational that we've just explained. To now fully understand the difference between strategy and planning, let's focus on strategy. And you can think of strategy as the high-level roadmap. It sets the core vision, the direction and competitive advantage about where the club wants to go, aka where to play and how to win. And the strategy could be so high-level, it could be explained by the manager to the press and media outlets in a press conference about where the club wants to go, without giving away any strategic planning, which was done behind the scenes in the earlier part of the video between both the manager and senior management and the board, where the strategic, tactical and operational plans were made. But remember the Cism technical keynote, the strategic planning was translated from the strategy being the mission, the vision and values of the club, aka be the best, win the trophy, which is printed all over the club's merchandise such as scarves, so there's no issue with the manager telling the media this. So to recap, strategy comes first, which is be the best, win the trophy, which is translated into strategic plans. And strategic plans are set by the board, and tactical plans are set by the manager, and operations are the day-to-day management and the training that happens before match day. And none of this is discussed in the press conference, only the high-level strategy is. And the high-level strategy will translate into the strategic planning anyway, which will become apparent on match day when the manager puts his team and tactics out for the whole world to see. Now I want to expand a little bit about what a strategy is, specifically a information security strategy. So let's go back to the training ground. So a strategy, aka information security strategy, which in this analogy is a football security strategy, so please indulge me. And I will start by explaining what a strategy is not. And it is not a list of tools to buy or schedule projects to complete. AKA, it's not just spending lots of money to buy Pasolini to win the trophy, although that is a part of it, but please indulge me. It's part of a bigger picture in the Cism textbook, which I'll explain now. So we have our current state and we have our desired state. And the difference between these two states is known as the gap. And the security strategy is to create a roadmap of initiatives or projects to close that gap. And here's a bonus Cism exam tip, which is more of an FYI. Every element of the strategy should translate directly to a business objective. For example, if the club Cism FC is playing in a European competition, there is a business rationale for buying European players, such as Pasolini. Talking of Pasolini, let's bring him on to the training pitch, where the football manager will explain the strategy. You see, Pasolini is one of the many initiatives that is designed to close the gap between the current state and the desired state. Now, the ISACA Cism exam defines 4 stages in building a strategy, starting with stage 1, which is meeting with business leaders, and that is to understand the business strategy, which can be from reading the annual report, the board's risk appetite statement, and the strategic plan. This is to understand where the business, aka club, is going, what decisions are being made, and what new risks those decisions create. This is all the input the security strategy depends on. This leads us to stage 2, which is to assess the current state. And this can be through conducting or commissioning a formal assessment of the current security, aka football posture. This includes reviewing existing controls, maturity levels, known risks, compliance status, and capability gaps. This assessment should produce a defensible picture of where the organisation, aka football club, is, not just where the manager or team think it is. And this leads us to stage 3, which is to define the desired state, meaning defining the security posture, aka football posture, the club, aka organisation, needs to achieve in order to support the business strategy, meet its obligations, and operate within its risk appetite. The desired state should be specific enough to measure against without being a technology shopping list, because you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't just go out and buy every single player. And that leads us to the final stage 4, which is build the roadmap. And that involves identifying the initiatives, investments and changes needed to move from the current state to the desired state. This is sequenced by risk reduction value, business criticality and dependency. And here's the most important Cism technical exam tip. The roadmap is the strategic plan that the governance structure funds, monitors and adjusts. And on the topic of strategy, having a strategy is simply not enough. The manager must be able to translate that strategy into budget requests, resource plans and organisational commitment needed to execute the strategy. Now in this section of the video I want to talk about reporting lines and the debate around this. So far in this video, in this analogy, the football manager has had direct access to the senior leadership, aka the board. So the target operating model, TOM, would be simple. It's just the senior manager who reports to the board and senior leadership. But not all football clubs or organisations are that simple. There is usually a lot of complexity that comes to roles and responsibilities. So for example, the security manager, aka football manager, could be positioned in several places on the organisational chart, which might drop him down the hierarchy, meaning that direct connection to the board might be gone and a new middle layer may be created. For example, let's imagine the club hired a new sporting director to sit between the board and the manager. And this would change the organisational chart and require a redefinition of roles and responsibilities. Because let's say in this analogy, the sporting director sits above the manager in the hierarchy. And this might mean that getting future Pasolinis may not be that simple anymore. But it all comes down to clear roles and responsibilities definitions to prevent the governance failure mode where everyone assumes someone else owns a decision. So to solve this problem, this is where a RACI Matrix comes in as a valuable governance tool. Now technically a RACI Matrix is a project management tool that maps out project tasks against team roles. But in this specific analogy, we don't have any teams per se. So the roles will just be the sporting director and manager, and the project tasks will be shared across these two roles. Now let's say historically that the manager did all these tasks when there was no sporting director, but since the sporting director has been hired by the board, this is why we need a RACI Matrix. So the way a RACI Matrix works is you have responsible, which stands for an R. That's the person who does the actual work to complete the task. Then you have accountable, which is the A, the single person who owns the final result and signs off on the work. Then you have consulted, which is the C, the expert who gives input and advice before a decision or action happens. And then you have informed, which is the person who is kept updated on the progress, but does not give input or do the work. So let's theoretically fill this in. The manager makes the tactical plan, so therefore is accountable as per earlier in the video. But let's say the new sporting director wants to be consulted on this tactical plan. And similarly, in terms of operations, training and matches, the new sporting director wants to be informed, whereas the manager retains responsibility, because match day is where the manager makes his money. But when it comes to scouting players, the new sporting director wants to be accountable, whereas the manager wants to be consulted. That's if he's even consulted, depending on how the new sporting director operates. And as for producing business cases to the board, the new sporting director wants to be accountable and the manager is to be responsible. In other words, the sporting director takes the credit but the manager does the work. And similarly, on selling club star players, the sporting director wants to be accountable, take the credit, but the manager wants to be consulted at the very least. So as you can see, whilst the manager and the sporting director may not see eye to eye or agree, and there may be various politics and bureaucracy in between them and the board, but ultimately a RACI Matrix is just that. It defines the roles and responsibilities, so it's clear to everyone, including the board's senior leadership, of who is doing what. And as general practice, every governance activity should have exactly one accountable party, because having multiple accountable entries in every single task creates a governance gap, because shared accountability is no accountability. So in this analogy, the sporting director and the manager can't both be accountable. Only one can be accountable and the other has to either be responsible, consulted or informed. Now to expand a little bit more on organisational structures and the reporting line debate. So let's say that the manager and the sporting director do not get along and that RACI Matrix caused more political problems than it solved. But the security function, aka manager, can be positioned in several places on the org chart as mentioned earlier. And to relate the football analogy to the reality of cyber, let's imagine the sporting director was the Chief Information Officer, CIO. But there may be other directors in the club, such as the Risk Director, for example being the Chief Risk Officer, CRO in cyber terms. And the manager may be better fitted under the CRO rather than the CIO for many different reasons. But these are just two examples. There are many other types of roles. Not just the Chief Information Officer or the Chief Risk Officer, but also General Counsel or Legal, the Chief Operating Officer COO, or just reporting directly to the Chief Executive Officer CEO or the Board once again. But each placement has its trade-offs. For example, reporting to the CIO is common and gives the security function aka manager close proximity to IT decisions, but it can create a conflict of interest, because the CIO is responsible for delivering IT services and may face pressure to deprioritize security control, and this can slow delivery aka results on the pitch. And this is why in this example the sporting director and the manager had so many problems, especially with the RACI Matrix. For this reason, reporting to a CRO Chief Risk Officer or the board provides greater independence and ensures that security risk is heard alongside financial and operational risk without the filter of an IT delivery agenda. So in this football analogy, the football manager would prefer the CRO over the CIO, aka the risk director over the sporting director, because the Cism exam expects you to recognise that independence from the function being secured is usually the best governance answer. I hope you enjoyed today's video and found it very informative. If so, it would be awesome if you could leave a like and subscribe if not already to help support this new channel's growth. And also drop a comment below if you would like to see more videos like this, perhaps even a part 2 to see whether Pasolini wins the InfoSec Cism trophy. Thank you again for watching today's video. I can't reiterate how important, ladies and gents, all your likes, subscribes and comments are in pushing this channel forward, because without these, both myself and YouTube cannot know whether you are enjoying these videos.